Picture this: you're standing in front of your superiors, people you've served faithfully for years. They're demanding you strip away the uniform that represents everything you've worked for, everything you believe in. Your heart pounds as dozens of eyes watch, waiting to see what lies beneath the fabric that has defined your identity. But what they discover isn't weakness or shame. Instead, they find a mark of survival so profound, so deeply rooted in courage, that it silences even the harshest critics. This is the moment when prejudice meets truth, when assumptions crumble, and when one woman's hidden story rewrites everything everyone thought they knew about strength. What could possibly be tattooed on someone's skin that would stop a room full of authority figures dead in their tracks? What mark could transform condemnation into respect, judgment into awe? Some stories start with whispers. This one begins with a command that would reveal a truth more powerful than any uniform could ever represent. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent their teenage years worried about prom dresses and college applications, she was already planning her future in the military. Born and raised in a small Texas town where Friday night football was religion and military service was considered the highest honor, Sarah knew from the age of 12 that she wanted to serve her country. Her father, Roberto Martinez, was a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke about his service but carried the quiet dignity that came with it. Her mother, Linda, was a nurse who had met Roberto when he returned from overseas, broken and searching for purpose. Together, they had built a life founded on service to others, and they had raised their daughter to understand that true strength came from protecting those who could not protect themselves. Sarah's childhood was marked by discipline and determination. She woke up at 5 every morning to run 3 miles before school, participated in every sport her small high school offered, and maintained a grade point average that kept her at the top of her class. While other students complained about physical education or tried to skip military history classes, Sarah absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone who knew she would one day put that knowledge to use. The decision to join the Army came naturally to her. During her senior year of high school, while college recruiters visited other students, Sarah spent her time with Sergeant First Class Williams, the local Army recruiter who had watched her grow up and recognized her potential. He saw something special in the determined young woman who asked detailed questions about combat roles and special operations rather than inquiring about college benefits or safe desk jobs. When Sarah told her parents about her decision to enlist immediately after graduation, the reaction was exactly what she had expected. Her father nodded with quiet pride, understanding that his daughter had inherited his sense of duty. Her mother worried, as any mother would, but she also recognized the strength and conviction in her daughter's eyes. They knew that Sarah was not making this decision lightly or impulsively. This was the culmination of years of preparation and soul-searching. Basic training at Fort Moore in Georgia was everything Sarah had prepared for and more. The physical demands that broke some of her fellow recruits only energized her. The mental challenges that caused others to question their decisions only strengthened her resolve. She excelled in every area, from marksmanship to tactical planning, from leadership exercises to survival training. Her drill sergeants quickly identified her as someone with exceptional potential. But it was during her advanced individual training that Sarah truly found her calling. She specialized in military intelligence, drawn to the complex puzzle-solving aspects of the field and the critical importance of accurate information in protecting soldiers' lives. She learned to analyze enemy movements, interpret intercepted communications, and provide real-time intelligence that could mean the difference between a successful mission and a catastrophic failure. Her first deployment came sooner than expected. Political tensions in Eastern Europe had escalated, and experienced intelligence personnel were needed on the ground. Sarah, despite being relatively new to the service, had demonstrated exceptional aptitude for languages and cultural analysis. She had spent countless off-duty hours studying regional dialects and political complexities, preparing herself for exactly this type of assignment. The deployment was to a forward operating base in a contested region where American forces were working alongside local allies to maintain stability. It was dangerous work, requiring intelligence personnel to venture outside the relative safety of the main base to gather information and coordinate with local sources. Sarah thrived in this environment, quickly earning the respect of both her American colleagues and the local interpreters who worked with their unit. She approached her work with the same methodical determination that had characterized her entire life. Every morning, she reviewed overnight intelligence reports while others were still waking up. She studied maps and local customs with the intensity of a scholar, understanding that knowledge could be the difference between life and death for the soldiers who depended on her analysis. Her expertise became invaluable to the unit. She had an intuitive understanding of the local population that went beyond what could be learned from manuals or briefings. She could read the subtle signs of tension in a village market, interpret the significance of changes in local communication patterns, and predict potential threat developments before they became immediate dangers. It was during her third month of deployment that Sarah's life changed forever. Intelligence had been received about a potential threat to a nearby village where American forces were scheduled to conduct a humanitarian mission. The information was incomplete and contradictory, coming from multiple sources with varying degrees of reliability. Standard protocol would have been to postpone the mission until more definitive intelligence could be gathered. But Sarah's analysis suggested that delay would actually increase the danger. She had been tracking communication patterns and local movements for weeks, and she believed that the threat was immediate but localized. More importantly, she had identified a window of opportunity when the village could be safely accessed and the humanitarian supplies delivered before the situation deteriorated further. Her commanding officer, Colonel James Morrison, was a veteran of multiple deployments who had learned to trust his intelligence specialists. He had watched Sarah's work over the past several months and had come to rely on her judgment. When she presented her analysis and recommended proceeding with the mission using a modified route and enhanced security protocols, he made the decision to move forward. The mission began successfully. Sarah accompanied the convoy as the intelligence liaison, monitoring communications and coordinating with local contacts who provided real-time updates on the security situation. The modified route she had suggested avoided known danger areas while still allowing the team to reach their destination efficiently. Everything changed when they were 3 miles from their objective. Sarah was monitoring radio traffic when she detected a pattern that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. The communication she was hearing did not match the intelligence they had received about the threat's location and timing. Instead, they indicated that the danger was much closer than anyone had anticipated. Without hesitation, Sarah reported her findings to Colonel Morrison. The convoy was immediately halted while she worked frantically to pinpoint the exact nature and location of the threat. Using her knowledge of local communication methods and her understanding of the regional tactical situation, she was able to determine that an ambush had been prepared directly along their planned route. The quick thinking and accurate analysis saved the entire convoy. Colonel Morrison made the decision to take an alternate route that Sarah identified, one that would require additional travel time but would avoid the ambush site entirely. As they made their way toward the village using Sarah's recommended path, they could hear the sounds of engagement in the distance, confirming that other forces had indeed been waiting for them along the original route. The humanitarian mission was completed successfully, delivering critical medical supplies and food to a village that had been cut off from assistance for several weeks. The grateful villagers expressed their appreciation not just for the supplies, but for the courage of the American soldiers who had risked their safety to provide help when it was most needed. But the real significance of that day would not become clear until much later. Sarah's quick thinking and accurate intelligence work had not only saved her own unit, but had also prevented a significant escalation of hostilities in the region. The ambush that had been planned was part of a larger operation designed to draw American forces into a prolonged engagement that could have resulted in numerous casualties and political complications. As Sarah returned to base that evening, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. She had done exactly what she had trained for, exactly what she had always known she was meant to do. She had used her skills and knowledge to protect others and to serve a cause larger than herself. That night, as she wrote in the journal she had kept since basic training, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. From a small town in Texas to a forward operating base in a dangerous corner of the world, every step had been preparation for moments like this. She understood now that all the early morning runs, all the hours of study, all the sacrifices had been worth it. She also understood that this was only the beginning. The military had given her purpose and direction, but, more importantly, it had given her the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. As she prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace about the choices she had made. The young woman who had left Texas with dreams of serving her country had become a soldier who was living those dreams every day. And, though she could not have known it at the time, the experiences she was gaining and the reputation she was building would soon be tested in ways she never could have imagined. Sarah's reputation as an exceptional intelligence specialist continued to grow throughout her deployment. Word of her successful mission analysis had spread through the command structure, and she found herself being consulted on increasingly complex operations. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and provide accurate, actionable intelligence had made her indispensable to the unit's success. 3 months after the convoy incident, Sarah was selected for a special assignment that would take her even further from the safety of the main base. A joint operation with Allied forces required an intelligence specialist who could work effectively with multiple nationalities and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Sarah's language skills and cultural understanding made her the obvious choice for the assignment. The operation was based at a smaller outpost that served as a coordination point for activities throughout the region. Unlike the larger base where Sarah had been stationed, this facility had minimal amenities and operated under constant threat of attack. The living conditions were Spartan, the work was demanding, and the danger was ever present. For Sarah, it was exactly the kind of challenge she had been seeking. Her new commanding officer was Major Lisa Thompson, a career intelligence officer who had spent the better part of 2 decades in various conflict zones around the world. Major Thompson was known for her exacting standards and her ability to get results under the most difficult circumstances. She had specifically requested Sarah for this assignment after reviewing her performance reports and speaking with Colonel Morrison about her capabilities. The work at the outpost was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Instead of analyzing intelligence from a relatively secure position, she was now required to venture into potentially hostile territory to gather information firsthand. This meant working directly with local sources, conducting surveillance in dangerous areas, and making split-second decisions that could affect the safety of multiple units operating throughout the region. Sarah embraced these new challenges with her characteristic determination. She spent her first few weeks at the outpost learning the unique rhythms and requirements of the operation. She studied the backgrounds and motivations of local contacts, memorized the layouts of nearby towns and villages, and developed a deep understanding of the political and social dynamics that influenced the security situation. Her first major assignment came when intelligence indicated that a high-value target was operating in the area. This individual was believed to be coordinating attacks against Allied forces and needed to be located and apprehended. The challenge was that he was constantly moving and had significant local support that made traditional surveillance methods ineffective. Sarah's approach to the problem was characteristically methodical. Instead of focusing solely on the target himself, she began analyzing the network of relationships and resources that supported his operations. She studied communication patterns, tracked financial flows, and identified the infrastructure that enabled his continued activities. This comprehensive analysis allowed her to predict his likely locations and movements with remarkable accuracy. Working with a small team of local allies, Sarah began conducting surveillance operations that took her deep into areas where American forces rarely ventured. These missions required her to adapt her appearance and behavior to blend in with the local population, often spending entire days in civilian clothing while gathering critical information. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but Sarah found it deeply fulfilling. Every piece of information she gathered potentially saved lives and advanced the mission of bringing stability to the region. She was making a direct, measurable impact on the success of Allied operations, and she could see the results of her work in the improved security situation throughout the area. It was during one of these surveillance operations that Sarah's life took a tragic turn. She was conducting reconnaissance in a village market when an unexpected attack occurred. Intelligence had indicated that the area was secure, but the situation had changed rapidly. A coordinated assault began without warning, targeting both military personnel and civilians in the vicinity. Sarah found herself in the middle of a chaotic situation with civilians running in all directions and hostile forces firing indiscriminately. Her training kicked in immediately, and she began working to coordinate an evacuation of the civilian population while calling for military support. Her knowledge of the area and her relationships with local allies proved crucial in organizing an effective response. But, in the confusion of the attack, Sarah became separated from her security detail. She found herself in a damaged building with several wounded civilians, including a young girl who had been seriously injured in the initial assault. The building was surrounded by hostile forces, and immediate evacuation was impossible. For the next 18 hours, Sarah remained in that building, providing medical care to the wounded civilians while maintaining communication with Allied forces who were working to reach their position. She used her intelligence training to monitor enemy communications and coordinate with the rescue effort, providing real-time updates on the tactical situation around the building. During those long hours, Sarah formed a deep bond with the injured girl, whose name was Amara. The child was perhaps 8 years old, with dark eyes that reflected both fear and incredible courage. Despite her injuries and the terrifying situation, Amara remained calm and even tried to comfort the other wounded civilians. Sarah was amazed by the child's resilience and strength. As the hours passed, Sarah realized that Amara's injuries were more serious than they had initially appeared. The girl needed immediate medical attention that Sarah could not provide with her limited supplies. Moreover, the building they were trapped in was becoming increasingly unstable due to damage from the ongoing fighting. When Allied forces finally reached their position, they faced a difficult tactical situation. The building was surrounded, and any rescue attempt would likely result in casualties among both the rescue team and the civilians inside. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She volunteered to remain behind with Amara while the other civilians were evacuated, ensuring that the young girl would not be alone if the worst happened. The rescue operation was partially successful. Most of the civilians were safely evacuated, but before Sarah and Amara could be reached, a secondary explosion brought down a significant portion of the building. Sarah used her body to shield the child from falling debris, suffering severe injuries in the process. When the rescue team finally reached them, they found Sarah unconscious but still protectively positioned over Amara. Both had been injured, but Sarah's actions had undoubtedly saved the child's life. The medics worked frantically to stabilize both patients before evacuating them to a field hospital. Sarah's injuries were extensive. She had suffered multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a traumatic brain injury from the debris that had struck her head. For several days, her survival was uncertain. She drifted in and out of consciousness, with medical personnel working around the clock to stabilize her condition. During her recovery, Sarah learned that Amara had survived and was expected to make a full recovery. The knowledge that her sacrifice had saved the child's life gave meaning to her suffering and reinforced her conviction that she had made the right choice. However, her own injuries were severe enough that her military career was effectively over. The traumatic brain injury had affected her cognitive abilities in ways that made her unsuitable for continued intelligence work. Her memory was impaired, her processing speed was reduced, and she experienced frequent headaches and coordination problems. The doctors were optimistic about her long-term recovery, but they were clear that she would never again meet the mental and physical standards required for her previous role. The news was devastating for Sarah. The military had not just been her career, it had been her identity and her purpose. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built her life around, seemed to be slipping away. She faced the prospect of medical retirement and an uncertain future outside the service that had defined her adult life. During the long months of rehabilitation, Sarah struggled with depression and a sense of lost purpose. The woman who had always been defined by her strength and capability now felt weak and directionless. She questioned whether her sacrifice had been worth it, whether she had thrown away her future for one moment of heroism. It was during this dark period that Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Amara's family had traveled to the medical facility where Sarah was recovering, bringing with them a gift that would change everything. The young girl, now recovered from her own injuries, had prepared a drawing for the soldier who had saved her life. The drawing showed two figures, one large and one small, standing together under a bright sun. At the bottom, in careful childish handwriting, were the words "My Guardian Angel" written in both English and the local language. When Amara presented the drawing to Sarah, she spoke through an interpreter, saying that she wanted to become a doctor when she grew up so that she could help people the way Sarah had helped her. That moment marked the beginning of Sarah's emotional recovery. She realized that her sacrifice had not been meaningless, that her actions had literally saved a life and inspired a child to dedicate her future to helping others. The impact of her service extended far beyond her military career and would continue to ripple outward through the life she had preserved. Sarah made a decision that day that would shape the next chapter of her life. She would find a new way to serve, a new way to protect and help others that did not depend on her wearing a military uniform. Her body might have been broken, but her spirit remained intact. She would rebuild her life around the same principles that had guided her military service: dedication, service to others, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Sarah's transition from military service to civilian life was one of the most challenging periods of her entire existence. After spending months in medical rehabilitation, she was medically retired from the Army with full honors and a disability rating that reflected the severity of her injuries. While her physical wounds had largely healed, the cognitive effects of her brain injury continued to impact her daily life in subtle but significant ways. Returning to her hometown in Texas, Sarah found herself struggling to reconnect with a world that seemed to have moved on without her. Friends and family members tried to be supportive, but they could not truly understand what she had experienced or the depth of her loss. The woman who had once been defined by her sharp intellect and unwavering purpose now felt adrift in a civilian world that seemed simultaneously familiar and completely foreign. The small town that had nurtured her dreams of military service now felt confining and limited. Sarah had experienced the wider world and had made a meaningful impact on international events. Settling back into the quiet rhythms of small-town life felt like a step backward, even though she knew that many people would consider her homecoming a blessing. Sarah spent several months trying to find her place in civilian society. She attempted various jobs, from working at the local Veterans Affairs office to teaching at the community college, but nothing seemed to provide the sense of purpose and fulfillment that military service had given her. Her cognitive limitations made some tasks more difficult than they had been before her injury, and she often felt frustrated by her reduced capabilities. It was during this period of searching that Sarah made a decision that would ultimately define the rest of her life. She decided to get a tattoo that would serve as a permanent reminder of her military service and the sacrifice she had made. The tattoo would be more than just decorative art, it would be a symbol of her identity and her commitment to the values that had guided her throughout her military career. Sarah spent weeks researching tattoo artists and designs, looking for someone who could create something that would properly capture the significance of her experience. She eventually found Marcus Chen, a tattoo artist in Austin who specialized in memorial and military-themed work. Marcus was a veteran himself, having served in the Marine Corps, and he understood the deep meaning that military tattoos could hold for those who had served. When Sarah explained what she wanted, Marcus immediately understood the significance of the project. She wanted a tattoo that would tell the story of her service, her sacrifice, and her ongoing commitment to protecting others. The design would need to be both beautiful and meaningful, serving as a permanent reminder of the most important experience of her life. Working together, Sarah and Marcus developed a design that exceeded anything she had originally envisioned. The tattoo would cover a significant portion of her back, telling the story of her military service through a complex series of interconnected images and symbols. At the center would be a representation of the moment when she had protected Amara, showing a guardian figure shielding a child from harm. Around this central image, the design would incorporate elements representing different aspects of Sarah's military career. There would be symbols representing her intelligence work, her deployment overseas, and her dedication to serving others. The entire piece would be unified by flowing elements that suggested both strength and grace, reflecting Sarah's character and her approach to life. The tattooing process took several months, with Sarah visiting Marcus's studio regularly for extended sessions. Each visit was both physically challenging and emotionally cathartic. As the design took shape on her skin, Sarah felt that she was reclaiming ownership of her story and her identity. The tattoo was becoming a declaration that her military service and her sacrifice had not been meaningless, but were instead the defining experiences of her life. During one of these sessions, Sarah met another veteran who was also getting memorial work done. James Rodriguez was an Army medic who had lost his leg in an improvised explosive device attack and was struggling with his own transition to civilian life. Like Sarah, he was using tattoo art as a way to process his experiences and maintain his connection to his military identity. Sarah and James struck up a friendship based on their shared experiences and understanding of the challenges facing wounded veterans. They began meeting regularly, not just at the tattoo studio but also for coffee and long conversations about their struggles and aspirations. James became one of the few people who truly understood what Sarah was going through and could relate to her feelings of loss and displacement. Through her friendship with James, Sarah began to discover a new sense of purpose. She realized that there were many veterans like herself who were struggling with the transition to civilian life and who needed support and understanding from people who had walked a similar path. Sarah began volunteering at veteran support organizations and participating in peer counseling programs. Her work with fellow veterans was deeply fulfilling in ways that her previous civilian jobs had not been. She was using her experiences and her understanding of military culture to help others navigate the same challenges she had faced. The cognitive limitations that had made other work difficult seemed less important when she was drawing on her personal experiences and her natural empathy for others. Sarah's reputation as a peer counselor grew steadily. Veterans throughout the region began seeking her out for guidance and support. She had a unique ability to connect with people who were struggling with the transition from military to civilian life, and her own experiences gave her credibility that professional counselors who had never served often lacked. It was during this period that Sarah met Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injuries. Dr. Williams had heard about Sarah's work with fellow veterans and was impressed by the positive impact she was having on people who had been difficult to reach through traditional counseling methods. Dr. Williams offered Sarah an opportunity that would change the trajectory of her civilian career. She invited Sarah to join her practice as a peer specialist, working alongside professional mental health providers to offer support and guidance to veteran patients. The position would allow Sarah to use her experiences and insights in a more formal capacity while providing her with training and support from experienced professionals. Sarah accepted the position eagerly. For the first time since her medical retirement, she felt that she was moving towards something meaningful rather than simply trying to find a place to fit in. The work would be challenging, requiring her to confront difficult emotions and traumatic experiences on a daily basis, but it would also allow her to make a real difference in the lives of people who desperately needed help. The training for her new role was intensive, covering everything from crisis intervention techniques to the legal and ethical requirements of working in a mental health setting. Sarah approached the training with the same dedication she had brought to her military studies, recognizing that the lives and well-being of the people she would be working with depended on her competence and professionalism. As Sarah progressed through her training, she began to see how all of her experiences, including her injury and her struggles with civilian life, had prepared her for this new role. Her military background gave her credibility with veteran patients. Her own experience with trauma and recovery allowed her to empathize with their struggles. And her natural intelligence and problem-solving abilities, even though somewhat diminished by her injury, were still more than adequate for the demands of peer counseling work. When Sarah completed her training and began working with her first patients, she discovered that she had found her true calling. The work was emotionally demanding and often heartbreaking, but it was also deeply rewarding. She was able to connect with veterans who had been resistant to traditional therapy and help them begin the process of healing and recovery. One of her first major successes was with a young Marine named David Patterson who had been struggling with severe depression and suicidal thoughts following a combat deployment. David had been through multiple treatment programs without success and was considered a high-risk patient by the clinical staff. Traditional therapy approaches had failed to engage him, and his family was desperate for help. Sarah's approach with David was different from what he had experienced before. Instead of focusing on clinical assessments and treatment protocols, she began by simply sharing her own story and listening to his experiences without judgment. She talked about her own struggles with finding purpose after leaving the military and her journey toward discovering a new sense of meaning in civilian life. Gradually, David began to open up about his experiences and his fears about the future. Sarah was able to help him understand that his struggles were a normal response to abnormal experiences and that recovery was possible even when it seemed hopeless. She introduced him to other veterans who had successfully navigated similar challenges and helped him develop practical strategies for managing his symptoms and rebuilding his life. Over the course of several months, David made remarkable progress. He began engaging with other treatment providers, developed healthy coping strategies, and started making plans for his future. His transformation was so dramatic that other staff members began asking Sarah to work with their most challenging patients. Sarah's success with difficult cases quickly established her as a valuable member of Dr. Williams's treatment team. She developed innovative approaches to peer counseling that combined her military experience with formal training in mental health support. Her methods were particularly effective with veterans who had been resistant to traditional therapy and who needed someone who truly understood their experiences. As Sarah's reputation grew, she began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and training programs for mental health professionals. Her presentations focused on the unique challenges facing wounded veterans and the importance of peer support in the recovery process. She became an advocate for incorporating veteran peer specialists into treatment programs and for recognizing the value of lived experience in helping others heal. Through her speaking engagements and her clinical work, Sarah began to rebuild the sense of purpose and identity that she had lost when her military career ended. She was serving others in a different capacity than she had as a soldier, but the core mission remained the same: protecting and helping those who needed support. Her tattoo, now completed, served as a daily reminder of her journey and her commitment to continuing that mission in whatever form it might take. 5 years after beginning her work as a veteran peer specialist, Sarah had established herself as one of the most effective and respected professionals in her field. Her innovative approaches to veteran mental health treatment had been adopted by treatment centers across the country, and she had helped hundreds of wounded warriors find their way back to meaningful lives. But, despite her success and the fulfillment she found in her work, Sarah still maintained her connection to the military community that had shaped her identity. This connection led to her decision to join the Army Reserve, a choice that surprised many of her colleagues and friends. Given her medical history and the limitations imposed by her traumatic brain injury, most people assumed that her military service was permanently behind her. However, Sarah had discovered that the reserve offered opportunities for veterans with her background to continue serving in non-combat roles that matched their capabilities and experience. The process of rejoining the military, even in a reserve capacity, required extensive medical evaluations and bureaucratic navigation. Sarah had to demonstrate that her cognitive limitations did not prevent her from performing the duties required of her new role. She also had to convince military leadership that her experience and expertise outweighed any concerns about her medical history. Her new position was in a military intelligence reserve unit that specialized in training and education. Drawing on her extensive experience as both an active duty intelligence specialist and a civilian mental health professional, Sarah was tasked with developing training programs for military personnel who would be working with traumatized populations. Her unique background made her ideally suited for this role, which combined her technical military knowledge with her understanding of trauma and recovery. Sarah's return to military service, even in this limited capacity, gave her a renewed sense of connection to the institution that had defined her early adult life. Wearing the uniform again felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a home that had been renovated in her absence. The Army had changed in the years since her active duty service, but the core values and sense of mission remained the same. Her work with the reserve unit was deeply satisfying because it allowed her to address one of the most significant challenges facing the modern military: the mental health and readiness of service members who were dealing with repeated deployments and traumatic experiences. Sarah's training programs focused on helping military leaders recognize signs of psychological distress in their subordinates and providing them with tools for offering appropriate support and referrals. The training programs Sarah developed were groundbreaking in their approach to military mental health. Traditional military culture had often viewed psychological struggles as signs of weakness, but Sarah's programs emphasized that seeking help for mental health issues was actually a sign of strength and professionalism. She used her own story as an example, demonstrating how someone could face tremendous adversity and still continue to serve effectively in different capacities. One of the most innovative aspects of Sarah's programs was her use of peer support models within military units. She trained experienced service members to serve as informal mentors and supporters for their colleagues, creating networks of mutual assistance that could operate within the existing military structure. This approach was particularly effective because it respected military hierarchy and culture while providing accessible help for those who needed it. Sarah's work caught the attention of senior military leaders who were looking for effective ways to address the growing mental health challenges facing the armed forces. She was invited to brief general officers and policymakers on her approaches and to consult on military-wide initiatives aimed at improving psychological support for service members. During one of these high-level briefings, Sarah met General Patricia Hayes, a three-star general who had spent her career advocating for improved support systems for military families and wounded warriors. General Hayes was immediately impressed by Sarah's combination of practical experience and innovative thinking, and she began involving Sarah in strategic planning discussions about the future of military mental health services. Through her work with General Hayes, Sarah became involved in developing policies that would fundamentally change how the military approached psychological health and resilience. These policies emphasized prevention rather than just treatment, focusing on building psychological strength and coping skills before problems developed rather than simply addressing issues after they became severe. Sarah's influence extended beyond policy development to practical implementation. She was selected to lead a pilot program that would test new approaches to military mental health in several installations across the country. The program represented the first comprehensive attempt to integrate peer support, professional mental health services, and military leadership into a coordinated approach to psychological wellness. The pilot program was launched at 3 military installations with different characteristics and challenges. Sarah spent months traveling between these locations, training personnel, developing local support networks, and refining the program based on real-world feedback. The work was demanding, requiring her to adapt her approaches to different military cultures and operational requirements. The results of the pilot program exceeded everyone's expectations. Installations that implemented Sarah's integrated approach saw significant improvements in service member mental health indicators, reduced rates of psychological casualties, and increased willingness among military personnel to seek help when needed. More importantly, unit cohesion and effectiveness actually improved rather than being degraded by increased attention to mental health issues. Based on the success of the pilot program, military leadership made the decision to expand Sarah's approach throughout the Army and, eventually, to other service branches. Sarah found herself at the center of a military-wide transformation in how psychological health was understood and addressed. Her work was literally changing the lives of thousands of service members and their families. The demands of leading this expansion were enormous, requiring Sarah to travel constantly, manage multiple teams of trainers and implementers, and navigate complex military bureaucracies. Despite her cognitive limitations, she proved to be an effective leader and manager, drawing on her military experience and her understanding of institutional change to guide the program through numerous challenges and obstacles. During this period of intense professional activity, Sarah received unexpected news that would add a new dimension to her already complex life. Dr. Williams contacted her with information about a letter that had arrived at the clinic where Sarah had first worked as a peer specialist. The letter was from Amara, the young girl whose life Sarah had saved during her final military deployment. Amara, now a teenager, had written to tell Sarah that she was about to begin medical school in the United States. She had received a scholarship to study at a prestigious medical university and would be arriving in the country in just a few months. In her letter, she expressed her desire to meet the woman who had saved her life and to thank her in person for the sacrifice that had made her education and future possible. The prospect of reuniting with Amara filled Sarah with emotions she had not experienced in years. The young girl had been a constant presence in Sarah's thoughts throughout her recovery and civilian career, but she had never expected to see her again. The knowledge that Amara had not only survived and recovered but had also achieved her dream of pursuing medical education was profoundly moving. Sarah made arrangements to meet Amara when she arrived in the United States. The reunion took place at the airport, and Sarah was amazed by the confident, articulate young woman that Amara had become. Though years had passed since their traumatic encounter, the bond between them was immediate and powerful. Amara had grown up with the story of Sarah's sacrifice as a defining influence in her life, and meeting her hero was an emotional experience for both women. During their first conversation, Amara explained how Sarah's example had shaped her entire approach to life and education. She had studied English intensively so that she could communicate with American medical professionals and had focused her academic work on trauma surgery and emergency medicine. Her goal was to return to her home country as a qualified surgeon who could provide the kind of emergency care that had saved her own life. Sarah was deeply moved by Amara's dedication and accomplishments, but she was also struck by the young woman's understanding of service and sacrifice. Amara had not simply been inspired to pursue medical education, she had been motivated to dedicate her life to helping others in the same way that Sarah had helped her. The ripple effects of Sarah's sacrifice continued to expand in ways she had never imagined. As Amara began her medical education, she and Sarah maintained regular contact. Sarah became an unofficial mentor, offering guidance and support as Amara navigated the challenges of studying in a foreign country and pursuing one of the most demanding educational programs available. Their relationship provided Sarah with a new perspective on the long-term impact of her military service and her ongoing work with veterans. The timing of Amara's arrival in Sarah's life coincided with a major transition in her military career. The success of the mental health initiatives she had developed had led to her promotion within the reserve structure and an offer to take on an even more significant leadership role. She was being asked to head a new department that would be responsible for coordinating psychological support services across all branches of the military. The new position would require Sarah to relocate to the Washington, D.C. area and to take on responsibilities that would affect military personnel worldwide. It was an incredible opportunity that represented the culmination of everything she had worked toward since beginning her civilian career in mental health. However, it would also mean giving up the direct patient contact and community connections that had provided so much meaning in her life. As Sarah considered this opportunity, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small-town girl with dreams of military service to a wounded warrior struggling to find her place in civilian society, and, finally, to a leader in military mental health innovation, her path had been marked by both tremendous challenges and remarkable achievements. The decision about whether to accept the new position would not just affect her career, it would determine how she would spend the next phase of her life and how she would continue to serve the military community that remained so important to her. As she weighed the possibilities, Sarah knew that whatever choice she made would be guided by the same principles that had directed her throughout her military and civilian careers: a commitment to serving others and a determination to make a meaningful difference in the world. Sarah ultimately accepted the position in Washington, D.C., understanding that the opportunity to influence military mental health policy on a national scale was too important to decline. The transition to her new role as Director of Integrated Psychological Services for the Department of Defense was both challenging and exhilarating. She found herself working in the Pentagon, briefing senior officials, and making decisions that would affect hundreds of thousands of military personnel and their families. Her new office was a far cry from the forward operating bases where her military career had begun, but Sarah approached her responsibilities with the same dedication and attention to detail that had characterized her service as an intelligence specialist. She understood that the policies she developed and the programs she implemented would have real consequences for service members facing some of the most difficult challenges of their lives. One of Sarah's first major initiatives in her new role was to establish a comprehensive network of peer support specialists throughout the military. Drawing on her own experience and the success of the pilot programs she had led, she worked to create positions for veterans who could serve as mentors and counselors for active duty personnel. The program represented a fundamental shift in military culture, officially recognizing the value of lived experience in addressing psychological challenges. The implementation of this network required Sarah to work closely with military leadership at all levels, from junior officers to senior generals. She discovered that her unique background as both a wounded veteran and a mental health professional gave her credibility with audiences that might have been skeptical of purely academic or civilian approaches to military mental health. During this period, Sarah's personal life was enriched by her ongoing relationship with Amara, who was excelling in medical school and had become like a younger sister to her. Amara's dedication to her studies and her unwavering commitment to returning to her home country to serve others provided Sarah with constant inspiration and reminded her of the far-reaching consequences of individual acts of courage and sacrifice. As Amara progressed through her medical training, she began specializing in trauma surgery and emergency medicine, as she had always planned. Her professors were impressed by her technical skills and her natural ability to remain calm under pressure. More than that, they were struck by her deep empathy for patients and her understanding of the psychological aspects of trauma treatment. During her surgical rotations, Amara often shared stories with Sarah about her patients and her experiences in the operating room. These conversations gave Sarah new insights into the medical side of trauma treatment and helped her understand how physical and psychological healing intersected. This knowledge proved valuable in her work developing comprehensive support systems for wounded military personnel. Sarah's influence in the Pentagon continued to grow as the programs she had developed demonstrated measurable success in improving military readiness and reducing psychological casualties. Her integrated approach to mental health, which combined professional treatment with peer support and unit-level interventions, became the standard model for military mental health services across all branches of the armed forces. Recognition of her achievements came in many forms, including invitations to speak at international conferences on military psychology and trauma treatment. Sarah found herself becoming a public figure in the field of veteran mental health, often cited in academic papers and policy discussions. Despite this recognition, she remained focused on the practical work of helping individual service members rather than pursuing personal fame or advancement. One of the most significant challenges Sarah faced in her new role was addressing the mental health needs of female service members, who often faced unique stressors and barriers to seeking help. Drawing on her own experiences and working with other female veterans, she developed specialized programs that addressed issues such as military sexual trauma, the challenges of balancing military service with family responsibilities, and the particular pressures faced by women in male-dominated military environments. These programs were particularly close to Sarah's heart because they addressed issues she had witnessed throughout her own military career. She had seen talented female service members struggle with problems that their male colleagues never faced, and she was determined to ensure that future generations of military women would have access to appropriate support and resources. The work was not without its controversies and challenges. Some traditional military leaders questioned whether the increased focus on mental health might somehow weaken military effectiveness or readiness. Sarah spent considerable time and energy demonstrating that the opposite was true. Units with strong psychological support systems actually performed better and maintained higher levels of combat readiness than those without such support. As Sarah's programs expanded and evolved, she began receiving recognition that extended beyond the military community. She was invited to consult with civilian organizations about trauma treatment and peer support models. Her approaches proved to be valuable not just for military personnel but for first responders, healthcare workers, and other professionals who face traumatic experiences in their work. This broader impact of her work gave Sarah a new sense of perspective on her career and accomplishments. The sacrifice she had made during her final deployment had not only saved Amara's life, it had set in motion a series of events that had ultimately benefited thousands of people who needed support in recovering from trauma and finding meaning in their lives after difficult experiences. The culmination of Sarah's civilian military career came when she was selected to receive the Secretary of Defense Exceptional Public Service Award, one of the highest honors that can be bestowed on a civilian working within the Department of Defense. The award recognized her contributions to military mental health and her role in transforming how the armed forces approached psychological support for service members. The award ceremony took place in the Pentagon, with senior military leaders and defense officials in attendance. As Sarah stood to receive the honor, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a small-town girl with dreams of military service to a wounded veteran struggling to find her place in civilian life, and, finally, to a leader whose work was making a difference in the lives of military personnel around the world. But the moment that made the ceremony truly meaningful for Sarah was the presence of Amara, who had arranged to attend despite being in the middle of her medical residency training. The young woman who had inspired Sarah's transition to civilian service was now Dr. Amara Hassan, a skilled surgeon who had completed her residency and was preparing to return to her home country to establish a trauma center in the region where she and Sarah had first met. After the ceremony, Sarah and Amara spent time together reflecting on their shared journey and the ways their lives had been intertwined since the terrible day when Sarah had shielded her from falling debris. Amara expressed her gratitude not just for Sarah's sacrifice during the attack, but for the example she had set throughout her recovery and civilian career. Amara shared her plans for the trauma center she would be establishing, which would provide emergency medical care for civilians affected by ongoing conflicts in the region. The center would be named in honor of Sarah and would serve as a permanent reminder of the American soldier who had risked her life to protect a child she had never met before. As their conversation continued, Sarah realized that Amara had something important to share. The young doctor had been corresponding with other individuals who had been affected by Sarah's military service, including members of the convoy that Sarah had helped save during her intelligence work and fellow veterans who had been helped by the mental health programs she had developed. Amara had organized these individuals to contribute to a special project, a scholarship fund that would support the education of military children whose parents had been wounded or killed in service. The fund would be named the Sarah Martinez Foundation and would ensure that the children of wounded warriors would have access to educational opportunities regardless of their families' financial circumstances. The revelation of this project moved Sarah deeply. She had never sought recognition or personal benefit from her service, but the knowledge that her example had inspired others to help military families was profoundly meaningful. The scholarship fund would extend the impact of her work far beyond her direct contributions to military mental health, creating opportunities for the next generation of military families. As Sarah considered this new development in her life story, she reflected on the transformation she had undergone since her military injury. The traumatic brain injury that had ended her active duty career had initially seemed like a devastating loss, the end of everything she had worked for and dreamed about. Instead, it had become the beginning of a new chapter in which she had found ways to serve that she never could have imagined during her active duty years. The tattoo on her back, which had begun as a way to commemorate her military service and cope with her transition to civilian life, had become a symbol of resilience and transformation. The image of a guardian protecting a child had proved to be prophetic, representing not just her protection of Amara during the attack but her ongoing work protecting and supporting military personnel and their families through her mental health advocacy. Looking toward the future, Sarah knew that her work was far from over. The Sarah Martinez Foundation would require her attention and guidance to ensure that it achieved its mission of supporting military children. Her role in the Pentagon would continue to evolve as new challenges and opportunities arose in the field of military mental health. And her relationship with Amara would continue to provide inspiration and perspective as the young doctor established her trauma center and began her own career of service. Most importantly, Sarah had discovered that her identity and purpose were not tied to any particular uniform or job title. Whether she was serving as an active duty intelligence specialist, a wounded warrior in recovery, a peer counselor, or a policy leader in the Pentagon, her core mission remained the same, using her skills, experience, and dedication to protect and help others who needed support. The small-town girl who had dreamed of serving her country had achieved that dream in ways she never could have anticipated. Her service had taken many forms, from analyzing intelligence in a war zone to developing policy in the Pentagon, but it had always been guided by the same fundamental commitment to making the world a safer and better place for others. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her life and career, she carried with her the knowledge that true service was not about the uniform you wore or the title you held, but about the impact you made on the lives of others. Her tattoo would always remind her of the moment when her military career had been transformed by an act of self-sacrifice, but her ongoing work with veterans, military families, and trauma survivors was proof that the most important service often came after the uniform was put away. The feared tattoo that would one day shock her superiors when they ordered her to remove her uniform was not just a mark of her past service, but a symbol of her continuing commitment to protecting and serving others in whatever capacity life might require. Sarah Martinez had learned that a soldier's duty did not end with military retirement, it simply evolved into new forms of service that could be even more meaningful and impactful than anything she had accomplished while on active duty.